All right, it's 6:01, so let's get started. I'm hopeful that other attendees will also be joining us shortly. Welcome and good evening. My name is Manira Sandhir. I'm the planning manager with the City of San Mateo, and I'm really excited to be holding this community workshop on the objective design standards with you all. We embarked on this effort a few years ago. We know it is an important priority for the community, and we feel that we have made progress, and we wanted to share some of the approaches that we are trying to incorporate into our standards, and get your feedback on some of the questions that we have for the community tonight. I would like to say that, I apologize if there was a mix-up on the start time of this meeting. I understand that when you register, you get the full invite. We had saved the first half hour just to work out some technological kinks. So my apologies if you've been waiting for a while. But we intend to make this an interactive discussion. I'm joined by our team here, and I'll introduce them in a second. But we are really excited to be back before you tonight with the objective design standards. All right, next slide, please, Christine, so I can introduce the team. Thank you. So as I said, I'm Manira Sandhir. I'm the planning manager for the city. And also from the city, we have Laura Richstone joining us tonight. She is an associate planner and the project manager from the city side, who is also your main point of contact if you have follow-up questions or comments, or want to discuss ODS for the city in any form. Her email and phone number is on the screen, so you can reach out to her directly as well after this meeting. From our consultant team, MIG, we are joined tonight by Laura Stetson and Christine Thompson, who will be facilitating the meeting as well as doing a presentation to kick us off. And then also Ellie Gertler, who will be managing our mural board as we get into the interactive discussion section. So with that, welcome again, and I will turn it over to Laura from MIG.
Thank you, Manira, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It's nice to have people interested in something that might seem a little bit obscure, objective design standards, or as we will call them, ODS. But these are an important component of shaping what San Mateo is going to look like in the future. Tonight, we are going to provide an overview of what ODS are and to outline the progress draft that staff and the consultant team have prepared to date, and get your comments on what we present. We have 4 key question areas that we want to focus on, but we really open up the discussion to anything that you want to cover with regard to objective design standards this evening. We've got about a 20-25 minute presentation, and then as much time as you all like to talk, well, up till 8 o'clock, we'll put a limit on it, but to cover what you'd like this evening. Next slide. This is a 4-phase process, as Manira indicated. It started about 2 years ago, but was put a little bit on hold just because some other pressing priorities that the city had. Next slide. We're currently in phases 2 and 3, whereby a draft of the objective design standards, an internal review draft has been developed, and we're looking for input from people who live in San Mateo and also the development community. We had a really great discussion earlier this afternoon with people in the development community, architects and designers and developers, just to understand what they're looking for. All of that information will be synthesized and, as appropriate, put into draft objective standards, ODS, which will go before the Planning Commission for a study session before formal public hearings later this year. Next. So let's talk about ODS. What are they, and what are the objectives and the outcomes? Next. The city is looking to put in place standards to regulate design, and the city does regulate design today through its design guidelines, which are subjective and flexible and subject to discussion before projects go before the Planning Commission. But the objective is to create really standards that people can grab onto and understand what they mean, and which are enforceable. They're not guidelines, they'd be standards. The state has passed some laws requiring that objective design standards be prepared, but this is part of the city's ground policy for reviewing projects in the recently adopted housing element, which is part of the general plan. And so that is very important as a foundation as well, because you understand that it's important to the city to ensure that good design results from projects. And we'll talk about what type of projects are subject to this. And in meeting with the community, the focus is on confirming what the priorities are for achieving great multifamily residential projects in your community. Next. And next, Christina.
Sorry, so I've got a delay going on.
That's okay.
There we go.
All right. So what are they? What do they affect? Where do they apply? And most importantly, how will objective design standards work? Next. As I mentioned, the legislature over the last 3 or 4 years has passed a number of bills designed to streamline housing development and ensure that those communities that really haven't been pulling their load on approving housing do so, because there's a great need for housing in California. And so these pieces of legislation that are put on the screen here have been adopted to increase housing production and to do it in a manner that is transparent and creates some certainty in the development process. Next. This is driven to a large degree by the fact that it's expensive to have a home in California, whether you're buying or renting. And in fact, as this little chart shows, that almost half of Californians throughout the state are what's considered cost burdened, meaning that they're paying more than 30% of their household income for either rent or mortgage and associated types of payments. And that's a big burden. It leaves a lot less money in your household budget to buy other things that you need. And so through the legislation, the intent is to, number one, increase the supply, but importantly, and remove the hurdles to allowing development to move forward. Importantly, though, the legislation is not a one-size-fits-all. Jurisdictions have the latitude to create their own standards that reflect the character of their community and what they're looking to achieve. Next. These ODS will apply to pretty much anything except for a standalone new single-family detached home in your community. So that's anywhere from a duplex all the way up to higher-rise apartments and condominiums and mixed-use developments that contain at least 2/3 a residential component. So that's a lot of the new development that you're seeing in San Mateo today. So the objective design standards will apply very broadly to new development in your community. Next. This map shows all of the zones in San Mateo, and pretty much anything that's not in that light yellow color is designated for multifamily housing or mixed-use development, with the exceptions of some of your industrial areas. So it will apply, as you see, to multifamily, mixed use, and also any lots that are zoned, any single-family homes whereby somebody wants to put 2 units on that lot. So remember, that's the key thing. If it's 2 or more units, the objective design standards will apply. Next. The housing element was just adopted in January of this year and has a very strong program to adopt the ODS. And this will occur in advance of the general plan, the rest of the general plan that's moving forward, because the housing element has already been adopted. Next. You want to get them right. Objective design standards are not a one-size-fits-all, we said. And so in order to get them right for San Mateo, the factors to consider are, what does the zoning ordinance say today? What does your general plan say? What's the zoning ordinance say? How do specific plans influence development? The city has a set of multifamily design guidelines, and I emphasize the word guidelines because they don't have the teeth that a development standard does. For example, the zoning ordinance would say, for example, a building cannot be more than 60 feet in height. That's a very clear standard. The design guidelines have squishier language and say things like a building should have articulation to reduce the massing. Those are the types of things that need to be converted to more achievable, knowable standards. And so those two things, together with input from the community influence the development of these objective design standards right-sized for San Mateo. Next. Staff has been working hard with MIG, and I have to say staff is doing a lot of good hard work on this, is to put together a progress draft of the objective design standards. Next. The ODS cover really 5 broad topics, and from starting kind of at what I would consider the 2-dimensional level of planning a development, the site planning. How do things lay out on the site? Where do you put parking? Where do you put the buildings? Where do you put the open space? Where are the driveways? So kind of this flat, how do you lay it out? And then also the 3-dimensional aspect of development. What does the building look like? What's the architecture? What colors are used? What does the roof look like? The next broad category, it covers landscaping, open space, and exterior lighting. So what are those outside components of the project that are governed? And then also little things that we've called ancillary features. Where do you put the utility hookups or meters, the fire hydrants, things like that, that also affect how a project is put together. Lastly, there is a category for specific plans. A specific plan is a plan that's done for a very compact area. Like, well, maybe not so compact, like Bay Meadows is governed by a specific plan, not the city's zoning ordinance, or components of El Camino Real have standards that are different than what are in the zoning code. And so those are called specific plans, but those have to have objective standards as well. And so those are all being addressed as part of the ODS. So what I want to do is, in a kind of a rapid fire fashion here, show you what each of these 5 main topics covers. Next. Site planning, as we mentioned, talks about the building siding, orientation, parking, driveways, and importantly, pedestrians and how they get and move about a site. Next. The next topic is probably the one that covers the meat of the ODS. How is a building articulated? Meaning, how do you break up the front of a building? How do you design the roof forms? How do you ensure that a building has a nice relationship to its neighbor, whatever that neighbor might be? The windows, doors, colors, everything that goes into the design of a building. Next. The landscaping focuses not just on landscaping for beautifying the site, but open space. How is open space used and designed, be it private versus common shared areas? Next. We mentioned ancillary features. I think a critical one is utilities and mechanical equipment. How do you put those on a site so that they're nicely screened and aren't detracting? I think the photo on the top there shows that there's a utility feature that probably could have been screened a little bit better, or maybe put someplace else on the site so it wasn't so prominent. Next. These are the specific plan areas. You can see, just to orient you, along El Camino Real, as we mentioned, there are several that cover El Camino Real. These have been adopted going back to the early 2000s. And in some instances, there are inconsistencies between the specific plans, or among the specific plans, and their relationship to the zoning code as well. So there's a lot of work being done to reconcile the design standards, or what are now guidelines in the specific plans, and bring them up into the ODS and in a manner that's consistent citywide as need be. Next. The objective design standards recognize that there are different scales of development in San Mateo. Most of the lower scale neighborhoods are 1 to 3 stories. Downtown El Camino, 4 to 7 stories. And then through a density bonus programs, when developers ask for a density bonus, a lot of times it means another story in exchange for providing affordable units. And so the ODS will recognize what needs to be done with buildings that are 8+ stories high. Next. Flexibility is critical. In putting objective design standards together, the thing that is paramount to avoid is making sure that you're going to get every building looking very similar in San Mateo. It's important that there be flexibility built in to accommodate a really diverse range of architectural styles, to give developers choices, not mandates. There might be a standard that says, here are 5 things we'd like you to do, choose 3 of them. And so that can add to the richness of the development. And if there is a developer for some reason finds that some of the standards just don't work for what they're trying to achieve, there will be a path to deviate from the standards that would involve a very public process, because they would be asking for something that would be a little bit out of the norm. Next. So before we turn to you and ask, what do you consider important in designing a building and what's going to have staying power and really preserve the character of your community, I'm going to turn it over to my architect friend, Christine, to walk us through some of the key terms that we'd like you to be familiar with. Christine?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, so we wanted to just kind of do a rapid fire discussion of some of the terms and some of the areas that the objective design standards focus on. So some of these elements, a wall plane offset, what is the wall plane offset? So we wanted to show a couple examples, some in San Mateo, some in the larger West Coast area. And so here you see where the wall plane breaks, where there's a pop out, and it's not particularly large. It's probably about 1/2 foot, maybe a little bit more. This one is larger and a different style building, but the same technique of breaking the front wall, having an inset and a part that steps back is used. So you'll see this common to a lot of buildings, even large buildings, where there'll be a pop out, and that will create visual variety on the fronts of these buildings. Here in this one, you can see it's actually a fairly deep inset, so maybe 1.5 feet, even 2 feet, and it's arranged so as to sort of show off the individual units. In this case, it's not so much about the individual units, it's about diversity in the larger set. Where this is really a grouping of flats, but the inset, which is probably closer to 2 feet here, is marking the entry. So the importance of the breaking of the wall plane is it creates shade and shadow. It can also be where material changes. And you can see that the color could change here as well, and that they can extend the entire length, height and height of the building, or they can be just a portion of the building. And I think this is one of the deeper ones. This might even be 2.5 feet deep, but again, creating shade and shadow and creating variety on the front of the building. So what happens when you don't have a deep inset? You can see this is an example where they've used color, but they haven't changed the form, and it looks big and boxy. And so you lose that sort of depth and visual variety. And in this example as well, another probably about 6 inches, still looking fairly big and boxy because there isn't a lot of differentiation in the wall plane. So now to talk a little bit about step back. Step back is also often used as an objective standard. This is an example of a building which steps back above the 3rd floor. And it's adjacent to a bikeway, and so the idea is to give the bikeway a little bit of more access to the sun and the sky. Other buildings step back also at the 3rd floor, but instead it's about providing more space to the street. And some buildings are actually stepping back at a lower level to reduce the massing of the building, or the apparent massing of the building. This is at the 2nd floor. This is also at the 2nd floor and begins to suggest a difference between the 2 streets. One street which would like to have a smaller apparent massed, smaller building, and then the other street which is more active, it isn't as necessary. The step back can really help keep that front line, the massing along the street seems similar while providing the extra capacity of the building, and in this case, step back at the 2nd floor. So talk quickly a little bit about transitions. So new development, new residential development inevitably will be nearby existing development, and there are methods to transition between the existing development and the new development. In this case, there's that 1-story fabric of the residence, and on the higher end of this building, there's a major corridor. So you can see that it's using mass to transition up to 5 stories. This is a similar situation. The corridor is on the other side of this building, and a low-rise residential single-family home fabric is on the other side. So you can see the 1-story to 3-story to 5-story transition. There are other techniques though, and they include an attached home solution that might be inserted into a neighborhood with detached single-family homes. And there may be screening requirements to help make that transition. Oops, sorry. Also, there are certain sites where the multifamily housing can be compact, but have the same scale and size as the adjacent and neighboring single-family homes. And again, another example where transitioning from the one-story residential fabric to a two-story to even a four-story. Other ways to create visual variety is to utilize a variety of colors. And so you can see on this wall, there's the upper level is a lighter yellow, while the lower levels have different colors. Sometimes in the residential construction, you will have a wall color, which is a blue, and then you'll have a trim. And so you get the visual variety through the outlining of the building elements. There are also different differences in wall to break down the scale of buildings, and even more geometric elements that are color elements, the blue band on this building. And here you can see contrasting colors that begin to pull out the balcony and the window elements that are different than the ends. Again, a variety of colors used on this building facade to really begin to show the differences along the front. So other techniques, thinking about the residential over the commercial, looking at the amount of window. The commercial windows at the ground floor tend to be much more glass, permeable to see anything that might be sold or to invite entry. Whereas the residential windows are smaller, more closed walled. Residential also may be pushed back. In this case, there are awnings and there's that commercial front right up against the roadway, and the residential balconies are back further. And then here you might have the base of the building made out of a more durable brick or stone, but you would still have those awnings. And then up above, you would have residential again with the smaller windows. There are other elements that the objective design standards are considering, thinking about the amount of recess to the entry and how it meets the street. Thinking about what is the difference between a deep entry or a narrow entry. Also considering how the entry can be indicated and meet the sidewalk for a really high quality pedestrian environment. The objective design standard also looks at elements around parking. So parking materials, thinking about should the parking screen be wood? Should it be more metal? We in a garage situation, do you need to vary the material to have windows? Or can it actually be a metal screen? But either way, screening the parking from view. And in this case, really providing that larger opening, but keeping with the theme of this industrial heavy brick, materiality that is at that bottom floor. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Laura, and she's going to run through the questions for discussion to help with our interactive session that follows this. Laura, you're on mute.
Thanks, Christine. There are 4 key issues that we would like to discuss with you this evening. And as I mentioned at the outset, don't feel constrained by just focusing in on these 4 topics. If there are other things with regard to the ODS that you want to comment on, we welcome those. But I'll run through in the next 2 or 3 minutes here the key ones of massing, transitioning, open space, and pedestrian connections. And so what Christine just walked you through were techniques that are used to break up the apparent massing of a building. And so these are the summary of all of the things that we just went through. Next. And the questions that we have for you, you don't need to write these down because we'll make sure that we've got them on our board that we're going to present to you. Christine, next one, please. It's trying hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's trying. Sorry about that. Here we go. We're going to get on the right one. There we go.
All right. So these are the questions. What do you feel are the techniques that work best to make a building look less massive, particularly as it gets taller? And is there an approach that provides too much detailing that really doesn't let anything function very well on the inside of the building if you try to detail it too much on the outside. What about roof forms? What adds to the character of the community in terms of the roofs? And what other techniques can be used to reduce massing? What ones do you like that Christine presented? Colors, materials, contrasts? Next. Transitions, folks feel, are important when it is moving down to a zone that is for lower density development, not necessarily what's there today, but ultimately what is the type of development that occur there. If it's a single family zone, certainly it will stay something that's no more than 2 stories. So is there a need for some type of transition to step down to that lower scale? Or are there other techniques, such as shown in the illustration at the bottom, where actually the side yard setbacks shown in yellow there are deeper than it would be if you just have a 1-story building? So it does allow for a more efficient approach to building by having a straight wall rather than a stepped wall, but the entire building is pulled back from the property line. So the questions about transitions are, what do you feel are the best transitions to use? Not necessarily just the building itself and how you do that, but is landscaping an effective way of creating those transition zones that folks think are important in the single family neighborhoods? Next. Open space. We love our open space, be it something that's a nice lawn, or maybe it's all concrete and you can go swimming or catch the sun in the afternoon. And for these multifamily developments, the open space requirement is largely divided between private open space, which is just for your own personal use, be it a little tiny yard or a patio or porch area, versus common open space area that everybody has the ability to use, be it inside or outside. And so the thought is to ensure that the standards allow some flexibility between that common and private. But we're also curious to know what type of amenities people like in the open space. Is it better to have the lawn area? Is it better to have children's play areas? What about rooftop open space? Does that work pretty well? So next slide are those specific questions. Passive, something where you can just sit like the pool, or active, where you can be out on a court. And what are those amenities that are desired, and should open space be prioritized in one way or another? Next. And last are the pedestrian connections. In multifamily housing, sometimes the entries are going to be directly on a street in a very walkable neighborhood. And so what can be done to bring the front door out towards the street to create and allow for interactions? Is that something that's desired in a walkable neighborhood through the use of stoops? When you're connecting parking areas to those entryways, what are the things that really distinguish it and make it attractive and safe for the pedestrians as they travel from parking areas to the building entries? So those are the questions that we have for you. Next slide. And particularly not just how does the entrance relate to the street, but on a larger block development, is there a need for some type of paseo or something that breaks up the block and allows people to walk through to the next block without having to walk along an entire block face? Does the community appreciate, and want to see more of these paseos? So that's a lot to put out there in front of you. So what we'd like to do is to turn the meeting over to you. And Manira and I are going to be asking you some questions, and let me get those questions up on the screen just a sec here. And then we will get underway. And Ellie is going to be very quickly typing down your comments. But if we're going to ask that folks raise their hands and we will call on you. But if you don't want to raise your hand, if you just want to put something in the chat, that's fine, because we can capture it and put it up on the board. And so as you see here, the 4 topics are massing, open space, transitions, and pedestrian connections. But we'd like to start with the massing, because that's something that really does affect how a building looks in the new place that it's put. So let's go ahead and get underway. And Christine, give me a minute here. I'm still looking to see how I can see whether or not people are raising hands. There we do. We got.
Okay. Yeah, and I think everyone can speak now.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, one more person.
And Laura, I can help with the who's raised their hand. So I saw Lori Watanuki raise her hand first, and then Leanne Eberhard.
Great, thank you, Manir. Let's do that because I can't see that while I'm still trying to share my screen and navigate around the mural board. So let's focus. And what I'd like to do is when you raise your hand, if you want to talk about massing, that's great. That's where we want to focus first. But if there's another topic that you're more passionate about, but please go ahead and discuss that. So Lori, you're up.
Oh, well, there are a couple of things. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes. In terms of massing, a lot of these projects, recent projects, are just so large compared to, and they're next to single-family neighborhoods and duplex neighborhoods. We don't have buffering between the two, so there's really a lack of transition between the single-family homes and these massive one-block projects. But if we could have a buffer area that has townhomes, that would be great. And I've seen this in Bay Meadows. I've seen this in Burlingame, where they have townhomes between the two. And this provides a much greater transition between a single family home and a 75-foot building, for example. The other thing I see in these larger massive projects is a lot of glazing in these large contemporary windows. And we'd like to see projects that really can coexist with the existing neighborhood, something that's more compatible, especially these windows. They're very large. There's problems with reflective glass and heat. And it would be nice to see windows that are framed in these larger projects, and more attributes that would be compatible with the existing neighborhood. I like the idea of step backs. I think that's good. I like the idea of stoops. I like the idea of eyes to the streets. I would like to see the parking in the back of the projects, like in Bay Meadows. We have a duplex design guidelines, and I think you should really take a look at that because it has a lot of good information that makes a better transition into the neighborhood. Let's see, I like the idea of paseos. That kind of breaks down the mass of the building. I think when you have one large massive building, it'd be nice to break that building up so you would have several buildings, but you can kind of walk through with a paseo, but make it so that it's more integrated into the neighborhood. I don't know if these things are making any sense to you. In the area of open space, I'd like to see more common open space and separate the areas which are children's play areas from adult areas, because I think adults need a quiet place to be, and the children they need areas where they can play as well. And these two things can conflict in a larger development. But those are some of the things that I would like to see in just more traditional elements when you have a traditional residential neighborhood.
That's great, Lori. You've given this a lot of thought.
Thank you, Lori.
Okay.
All right, our next speaker is Leanne Eberhard.
Do you want me to just stick with the massing or?
No, Laura, you've got the floor, Leanne, so go ahead and hit them all.
Okay. And then to a question, is this just really about residential, or be, able to speak a little bit about downtown?
Well, Leanne, Laura, I can probably take that. You're welcome to talk about downtown as well, Leanne. So our current standards are focused on mixed use development with the residential component, as well as, just solely residential multifamily uses. Okay. But this could be a good basis for objective standards in the future for other types of uses. We would just have to see.
Okay. Well, I live in North Central, just north of downtown. And I really like I'm an architect, so I have to say I love all your examples. You went and picked all the nice ones, most for the most part. So well done. I agree with you. There's a lot to be said about having designers be able to do different things. So not hamstringing people too much, but I understand the concerns from the traditional residential areas. As far as the massing goes, I really like the ways of breaking it up that you've shown. That's great. One of my concerns lately has been downtown San Mateo, which is getting a lot of mixed use projects in there, and there's a push to get the 5-story buildings, and I'm just concerned about the massing of those buildings, losing the sun in the downtown area, so that sitting outside and in coffee areas and stuff like that, you're going to be shaded by 5-story buildings. Having worked in downtown San Francisco, I know it's like a wind and tunnel corridor down there. So just wondering, if there's a space in here to look at for the downtown for like solar and maybe wind studies, that kind of aspect. For the roofs, as far as massing, it would be great to have like solar or roof gardens, community gardens in the top of the roofs. Again, looking at the environmental aspects of construction. Let's see, you were talking about good transitions between the different housing, and I live in a very compact area in North Central, and landscape is not a landlord's friend. So I have to say, you may like to propose landscape, but it doesn't always happen. We have a lot of ignored lots over here. So I would suggest that's not something to lean heavily onto in a smaller, developments. Maybe in the, the larger Wood Lake and Bay Meadows, it's a little bit more successful. So I would probably say stepping down and transitioning through the building itself rather than landscaping, perhaps. Here's my notes. I guess also too, along the train corridor, there's some housing going in on 5th Street, and the other thing to be thinking about as far as residential is the noise of the trains. I know in St. Carlos, you got a lot of housing complements going up against the train line, so I'm sure this is a consideration with windows and stuff like that, the noise of the trains going by. The pedestrian connections, I really have to say, I've got my fingers crossed for B Street in downtown San Mateo. I hope we keep the pedestrian, the 2 blocks or more. I would love to see a pedestrian access from the Caltrain node to 3rd Street and then somehow over to Central Park, because I think those are like key design areas. So, and I liked all the things that you said about your, the in the multifamily housings, a lot of different things you can do to look at the, the different connections at a pedestrian scale rather than having huge huge walls, again, that's a step back issue, and having things at a pedestrian scale at the street is really beneficial. So that's it.
Thank you, Leanne. Okay, let's see. Who else had? Oh, I don't see any other hands raised. Laura, should we start calling on people? Oh, I see a couple of people raise their hands right now. Okay, Lisa.
Mm-hmm. And I want to note too, Manira, that Daniel has a long, nice typed note in the chat. So if people want to put things in the chat too, that's great. Lisa, you're up.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much for this presentation. I like a lot of the images that you're presenting. I am a San Mateo resident and a practicing planner. And I had a few questions, I guess, broader questions, just maybe something to consider. As a practicing planner, I've worked in other jurisdictions where there's varying degrees of flexibility within these objective design standards. And I guess I would ask how that may be considered. I know that the idea is that they need to be objective so that when a development comes in, they're able to kind of understand what the parameters are essentially and be able to meet those. And so I think that's, I know that that's obviously what is necessary here, but I have seen different ways that gets implemented. For example, I have seen the city of Palo Alto kind of have two different ways of evaluating projects and have some choices there. And I was curious if that's something that the city might look into, where you could have these objective design standards and you can also have some more flexible standards. So thought I'd put that in there. And the flexible standards are still considered something that a project can elect to review and gives the city some discretion on that. And I found that that's kind of an interesting way of doing it, just because it allows a little bit of choice there that I think people have been talking about, that it's not one size fits all. Mm-hmm. And then I've seen sort of the opposite, where these objective design standards have been applied to every type of development, and that can be a little bit restricting. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to just have that out there for consideration. Mm-hmm. So I thought I'd put that out there. I like a lot of these images, and it would be great to have sort of more emphasis, I think, on the pedestrian realm. I think as particularly as San Mateo gets more developed, creating that emphasis on the public realm and those spaces, I think would be beneficial. And I think that's mainly what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Lisa. I will say that flexibility is our primary objective as well in the objective design standards, because we also recognize that, we do not want the same kind of development all across the city, and we want to give developers the freedom to choose a certain design style, yet allow for flexibility in terms of massing and articulation and step backs to meet the same objectives and make sure we have quality design in the city. So Laura probably can share one of the examples of how to approach that.
Sure. A couple of I'll mention two key ones, Lisa. I had said that there will be several standards that will present 6 choices or six approaches to, say, massing. And the standard will say, pick 3 of these. Or if there are ways to distinguish a building, pick 2 colors and 2 materials. We're not telling you which ones, or you mix it up. I think a critical one is, we don't care what your architectural style is, but if you choose craftsman, stick to craftsman. Or if you choose mid-century modern, make sure that your windows and your doors and your roof and everything about that is a mid-century modern building, and not create I don't know if this is a technical term, but a mishmash of things on a building. So the flexibility is there, but there are bumpers and guards.
Oh, that's great to hear. I think that's could be very effective to allow some choice within a sort of a set of options. I think that's what I hear you say. And then I think I've also seen sometimes too where you can have things expressed in terms of percentages or ranges, et cetera, so that can allow a little bit of flexibility too. If you're going to do a certain length, have a certain percentage dedicated to this, or modulation, and it should be a certain percentage, and then that can allow for some flexibility. But it sounds like it's going in that direction, so that's great to hear.
Thank you, Lisa. The next commenter is Mitch Spiegel. I hope I pronounced that right.
You did a great job. Hi all, Mitch. I'm also a resident of San Mateo. I'm mostly focused on some of the missing middle that we experience as our community and kind of our housing stock. I think a lot of the stuff that we've seen here is some of the larger multifamily developments. So what I'd like to kind of talk about is how we can apply those to our duplexes, our 4 units, our 5, 6s, those type of buildings. I think the paseos and things like that are really helpful. I want to echo, I believe it was Lisa who mentioned about the flexibility. I think that sometimes some of the design standards that I've seen can be, kind of cost prohibitive for some of the smaller developments. So maybe something to think about is to, if it's a development that is maybe, 6 units or 5 units or something smaller, that maybe the steps aren't as onerous as they might be for, a large, 200 unit building, because of the time and financial constraints that poses for that development. For the massing piece, I really like the wall offsets. I think it does a really good job of visually breaking up the building. I had kind of more of a question about the step backs with the roofing. With a step back like that, are you able to utilize that space? Like, could that be like a rooftop community area? Could it be a balcony? Or does the step back have to be just purely a pure architectural design piece?
It could absolutely be a usable piece, Mitch. I don't know if I think one of the examples that Christine had shown where the 3rd story is stepped back, and that there was a nice, not a balcony, almost a deck, a 2nd story deck for the unit that was in front of it, behind it. So yeah, absolutely, it could be used for that.
Yeah, I really like that. I appreciate the insight on that. I really love that idea. I'd love to see more of that in San Mateo. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin originally. So we usually like to take our outdoor spaces when we can get them, when it's not icy out there. And that kind of goes into a little bit of the open space section that we discussed. Is I would like to see things in San Mateo that are kind of built more around a mix of ages gathering there. I really like what they did with the Fieldworks area over there by, I forget what that company is. It's in Central, the Fieldworks Brewing Company and Blue Bottle, and those things are over there. I really like how that was done, because it allows, you can have group space for events, you can have businesses there, you can have weekends, you can have kids. So I'd like to see more of that as some of the open space we look at versus a pure, park, or something that's a little bit more engageable for the community. And that's really all my feedback. I appreciate you guys having this. And like I said, I guess my last little underline is just the flexibility piece that you mentioned, especially when it pertains to, some of the smaller developments that may not have a large design budget, or may not have the financial capabilities to, really bring a lot of these to the forefront. But thank you guys.
Thank you, Mitch. That's an excellent comment. I know as part of our housing element, we did recognize missing middle housing as a priority as well. So this definitely shines a light on that need, and we appreciate the comment. We'll be mindful of it. All right, our next speaker is Lori Hyder. Welcome, Lori.
Lori, I think you're still on mute. There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Hi, thanks so much for holding this. This has been really helpful. I appreciate the education that you've provided to us, because oftentimes our comments can get stuck in, that doesn't look right, but we don't know why. I've looked at the Field Guide to American Houses, trying to figure out the architecture and what's right and what's wrong and why something doesn't look right. So I appreciate the education aspect of this. One of the things I want to present is that San Mateo is an historic city. It was developed as a result of the commuters coming down from San Francisco, rail and streetcar commuting. And so I'd really like to see things around the downtown reflect that historic nature. And I fully recognize that the city has many different areas and districts, and agree that we should have different architecture in different areas. I agree with a lot of Lori and the previous speakers' comments, but I'd like to have more transitional architecture, I guess, in the downtown, and I'll talk about that first. I think 180 East 3rd did a good job of trying to make a balance between a new building and maintaining the feel of historic architecture. And by historic architecture, I think it's the classic design elements and maybe having some elements, decorative elements, dentals. I don't have the list of all the terms that reflect the historic nature of the development in San Mateo. I'm concerned, what I don't like are the big boxes that some of the newer development just seems like the cheapest box architecture, put big planes of glass, and it doesn't seem as, San Mateo has a sense of place, and I would like all of San Mateo to have some sense of place. And I know it's hard to have an objective design standard that says use really high quality architecture. And to that, some of the articulation gets kind of out of control, where there are too many bump outs, too many different colors, too many design elements. So I'd like to avoid, I think, as Laura said, a mishmash, and to have some kind of design style for some of these buildings. I like the rooftop open spaces. I like patios. I like Leanne's point about the landscaping, that maintenance is very important. And if there could be a design standard related to maintenance, I think that would really help maintain quality of the architecture. I think the wind tunnel effect is really real. Every time I walk downtown, 4th and El Camino is the windiest place in the city of San Mateo. And it's because you have two tall buildings right next to each other. We're gonna have a lot of that downtown. I don't know what happened with the wind studies, but I'm really concerned about the wind tunnel effect. Even Frank Lloyd Wright, incorporated that into his desert design elements. You have two big structures and a space between, you have wind. So I think that really needs, a wind study should be included in the high-rise buildings, or even 3 to 5 stories. One of the most important things is to be compatible with the neighborhoods, to look at where you're building and to take cues from that. Maybe, and I guess that's especially more so in downtown. So those are my comments. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the work you're doing. I think this is going to be a really big help to San Mateo, and I look forward to hearing about objective design standards for residential neighborhoods that focus on respecting the style of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori. All right, who would like to go next? Please raise your hand.
A lot of people listening quietly.
Well, we had a few comments. We had a few comments in the chat as well. Thank you, Christine. and Ellie for noting those and adding them to our mural board. But would anybody else like to share some of the thoughts that you guys may be having, or examples from other cities that you like that resonate with you and might help us as we draft these specific standards? I did see a comment about allowing for like an alternative design review process if somebody didn't want to meet a standard, and we're absolutely considering that as well for our ODS. I think that's a good way to provide flexibility and allow for that community process. We have Leanne with her hand raised again. Go ahead.
Like good standards or whatever. And I'm not sure that this relates to the buildings per se, but the method of getting back and forth between buildings and places. I really love trying to get rid of cars. They just dominate our building so much with parking garage entries and scattered around in the landscape. But my aunt used to live outside of Sydney, and you could I was so impressed that you could always she lived in a high-rise building, and it was beautiful little space, and you could go down to the base. You could take a bus. There were always buses running right to the train station, and then you could get on the train and go right into downtown Sydney. And it was just so easy and so seamless. And I just see San Mateo, if we had a way to get the buses, to the train station, somehow it all worked together, it would be so awesome. So that's just my little plug.
Leanne, I hear you. I mean, I think that's a Bay Area-wide hope and goal that someday all of the different buses and train systems that we have, I don't know how many there are total, but they all connect with each other seamlessly, right? That would
So, but anyway, thanks.
Sure. Go ahead, Mitch.
Hi, I just had more of a question. Leanne brought up a good point about some of the wind, and I think that's been kind of mentioned a couple times. Do you guys have any strategies or things that you've seen done well in other communities to mitigate some of that, to encourage the open space, but also not make it a wind tunnel? I'm not sure if that's landscaping or are there any design elements that kind of come to mind to mitigate any of that?
Christine, I'm going to call on you. I know you're busy trying to take notes as well, but do you have any thoughts on techniques that are used to reduce wind?
Yeah, a lot of it is actually breaking up the massing is really important, and so that you get a varied surface, because a lot of the channeling that happens is actually due to having a very singular surface that wind can bounce off of. So I think that's really that's some of the reasons why we're talking about the variation for visual variety, but also to address that wind component. I think there are a lot of individual conditions, and they do have to be individually attended to. So I think providing flexibility in design is also the other strategy that people can really address those issues.
Mm-hmm. And Mitch, we'd be happy to look into this further, because I do think it bears addressing. California can get windy, and that wind chill is, can really hurt and perhaps prevent people from using outdoor spaces and outdoor amenities and, using the sidewalk or the paseo, for example. So we'll certainly explore what other strategies may exist out there and see how they can be incorporated into the ODS.
Looks like David's been encouraged to raise his hand.
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
Hi, David. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm with the Sierra Club Sustainable Land Use Committee, and we sent the city a letter 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, about the objective design standards. And our big concern was, and you've addressed it a little bit here already, was to try to prevent it becoming all building and no landscaping, no open space. And a lot of that seems to be happening up and down the peninsula. And the idea of providing setbacks at the buildings, unless it happens to be a mixed-use building on a commercial sidewalk, almost all residential buildings really should be set back from the sidewalk, maybe 15, 20 feet, so you can get landscaping and whatever in there. And the landscaping that is there, a good chunk of it should be publicly accessible, or at least publicly visible, as opposed to interior courtyards that serve the community, the housing development, but they don't really serve the overall community of the city. And so we just encourage that you try to get as much green space, nature into the project as possible, and not just build the buildings right to the streets. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
David. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of good chats in Manera that are being put up on the board. Leanne, you got some great stuff that you've included here. And Christine, thank you for getting that up on the board. Let's see, Mitch has his hand up again.
Hi, I had another quick question about the transition piece. I saw we kind of scanned over it. With our housing element and our general plan, a lot of the spaces that we see today will be much different 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. How can we build a design, an objective design standard that can, with the transition in mind, it might be, R3 now, but 5, 10 years from now, that might be the site of a 12-unit building. Like how can we design a system that grows with San Mateo as it becomes more dense and developed? Would the design standards change? Like, would there be a period to review in 3 years or 5 years?
Laura, do you want me to take a stab at it?
Yep, sure, please.
So yes, Mitch, I think this is our first attempt at ODS, right? So we're trying to get it right. As Laura mentioned earlier, we, are gathering all the input, and we'll use these standards for the next few years and perhaps even test them. And hopefully, we got it right the first time around, but there will absolutely be an opportunity to come back to them. We felt like a 3-year timeline would be a good timeline to revisit and see how they're going. Of course, our general plan is also in the process of being updated. So that also provides opportunities for looking at zoning transitions. So if something is intended to be R3 in the future, but is next to R1, perhaps there's an opportunity to have a little bit of R2 between R1 and R3, or what have you. So there's definitely a lot of efforts that are going on in parallel that will address that transitioning issue. And hopefully we'll get it right so that, 20 years from now, we can be proud of the effort that we put in today. Does that answer your question, Mitch? Or
It does. Thank you. I think that's, I really like that, because a lot of stuff what we're doing right now with the general plan, it's very, very far reaching, right? I like that you guys are kind of already planning to review and to update as we go along. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Manera, I'm not seeing any additional hands. Do you want to call on anyone, or do we just want to review some of the material that's in the chat that's coming through? There's a lot of good thumbs up to more planting areas, more landscaping, and not creating just concrete jungles in San Mateo as it grows.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura, I wanted to see if there's somebody who hasn't spoken yet who would just like to chime in. I see a few names: Becky, Beth, Christine, Daniel, Helen, Justine. Would you guys like to share any thoughts? Please feel free to unmute yourself and speak. I think you don't have to raise your hand. Right, Christine? Like, I don't think they have to raise their hand, right? We don't have to unmute anybody. Yeah.
No, they can just,
No, they should be able to speak.
Okay. Well, let's give them a minute here if there are further comments or thoughts. Well, should we zoom out a little bit from the mural board? Laura, do you want to maybe summarize the 4 areas, like what we've generally heard? And if there are no further comments, we could wrap up early today, it sounds like.
Sure. I would circle flexibility is good. A lot of folks have said, let's not create a lot of sameness, and let's use things to break up the buildings. And as Christine indicated, to help reduce the wind tunnel effect. That's another benefit of using offsets and other things, articulation in the building, making sure that, you know, that the standards apply to all forms of housing and focus on not just the higher rise, but also the missing middle housing, that needs to look just as good and you need just as much attention. There were a lot of comments with regard to the importance of transition and the fact that there are some nice historic and other single family neighborhoods in the community, and maybe through the general plan process, you can create those buffers as you're looking to see how the transition moves from lower intensity to higher intensity. So I think, Manira, yes, indeed, to your point is the ODS are moving ahead of the general plan, but there is going to need to be that check against what the general plan is indicating. We got comments that open space is good. I think that's important, and to be creative in how you're using open space, using setbacks and deck areas where you've got buildings set back, places for children and places for adults, and maybe those two don't need to mix with each other. And common open space is great because it provides places for the community to come together. And so while we do like our yards and porches, there are great benefits to having places where people can congregate. Mm-hmm. And then for pedestrian connections, I think it was Leanne who made a plea for getting rid of our cars, or at least making it a lot easier to use public transit, and presumably to use the pedestrian connections to get us there. And that anything that we can do to make it easy to get into the homes and get people to walk would be great. So there's a lot here. And then there were, sorry, I'm not helping, not making anybody dizzy by doing this, but topics that were not specifically focused on the 4 things that we asked about, but making sure that, you know, related to the flexibility is that there's a process for alternative designs. I thought these were really great comments about the uniqueness of San Mateo and making sure that these objective design standards, I think it was in one of the chat comments, that it don't do what all the other peninsula cities are doing. Look at what the character is of San Mateo and make sure the objective design standards continue with that character and the diversity, and not just a bunch of glassy boxes. And then let's see, I think we started out the meeting with a good, very long comment. I think it was from Laurie, perhaps, that covered a lot of, or no, I guess this was Leanne maybe, that talked about Palo Alto and looking at some of the examples there. So this is a lot to draw from, and we really appreciate the thoughtful comments that people came prepared with this evening. It almost sounds as though you had insights into what we were going to ask you, and you brought your notes with you, and so that's great. So Manira, I'm going to turn off the mural if we want to have any closing comments, and if you want to go ahead and do that. I want to thank Ellie and Christine for typing furiously.
Yes, and I'm looking at the chat, and a lot of exciting conversation happening there as well, including whether we can draw from international standards and looking at making, you know, paving more porous and sustainable, looking at, you know, pedestrian only neighborhoods. So a lot of exciting ideas there. And, you know, I would also encourage you guys to join us as we move through our general plan process, because of a lot of the policies at the community level and the community design level are also being set through our general plan process. So we welcome your engagement there as well. Really glad that you guys were able to join us tonight. Of course, this is not the end of the process or the engagement process. We are looking to take all of this input and actually finish drafting the ODS. And our next steps will include a planning commission study session. And we hope to release a working draft before that, which you can, you know, really look closely at and provide even deeper comments of, you know, anything that we may have missed or maybe that needs refinement. I know there were some important topics raised tonight, including the wind tunnel effect or even the missing middle housing and how that can be addressed. So really appreciate everybody's feedback, and we look forward to engaging with you throughout this process. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.